If you're a writer, you very likely have heard the piece of writing advice, show, don't tell, which encourages you to make an effort to show things that are happening in your story in an immersive way instead of just telling the readers what is happening in your story. But sometimes it's important to tell readers what is happening in your story, because if you showed them everything, your story would be really boring. So today we're going to dive into the idea of when to show versus when to tell, and how to balance these two things in your story. In other words, we're going to talk about narrative summary versus scene. Every novel can be broken down into a series of important moments. I like to think of these as story beats. These story beats give shape to your story. In every story, you will have an inciting incident, you will have a midpoint, you will have a climax, you will have a resolution, and you'll have many beats in between these big plot points that connect the two plot points and move your story forward. Like if you're writing a book where Jane meets John and they fall in love, one of your story beats will be the time that Jane meets John for the first time in the coffee shop. And then another beat will be when Jane and John go on their first date. And another beat will be when Jane and John get into their first fight. And another beat will be when Jane and John break up. And then another beat will be when John and Jane realize they love each other and get back together. And another beat will be when Jane and John get married. These are the most important beats in the story of Jane and John. There's obviously a lot of stuff that happens in between each of these story beats. There is going to be stuff that happens in between when Jane and John are first meeting each other and when they go on their first date. Maybe Jane tells her roommate about the cute boy that she met and what she thought about him. Maybe John goes and calls his mom and says, "Oh, I met this really cute girl." But if they meet each other on a Wednesday morning and they go out on their first date on a Thursday night, then you have the rest of the day on Wednesday and the rest of the day on Thursday to account for that happens in between these two important moments in your story. And not all of what happens in those 2 days is going to be important to your story. Like maybe Jane talking to her roommate about the cute boy that she met is important because it shows that Jane is developing a real crush on John and is excited about their date. But maybe Jane taking a shower at night before going to bed, or taking out her contacts, or taking her vitamins, or walking the dog is not going to be as important to the story of her relationship with John. It's your job as the writer to isolate the moments that are critical to your story, that move the plot forward and change something either within your character or in the external conflict of your story, and spend time in those moments, really flesh those moments out so that the reader can be brought into them, and then get between those moments as quickly as possible. So you spend a lot of time in the details of the very important scenes, and not as much time in the details of the stuff that happens in between the really key moments. So these big moments that are dramatized in your novel are called scenes. Every scene is centered around a conflict in your story and showcases a moment of change for the characters. Every scene has its own small little structure. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It has a climax. It has something that the character wants, something that's standing in their way. And it's written in a way that really brings the reader into the moment with the character. This is where you show the most in your writing. The writing that you do to bridge scenes together is called narrative summary. Narrative summary is very straightforward telling. It is there to give the readers an idea of what's going on in between scenes and to knit the scenes together into a narrative that makes sense. If you jump straight from the scene of John and Jane on their first date to John and Jane getting into their first fight without any semblance of time passing in between or anything else that happens in between those two events, the readers may feel like it's jarring to read and are going to get confused as to how your narrative is structured. So the definitions that I like to use for these are that narrative summary is prose that tells you what is happening and recounts events, and a scene is a dramatized moment in time that is important and moves the plot forward. So a novel is just a series of important scenes, and the narrative summary connects those scenes when possible. So now we know the difference between narrative summary and scene. I'm going to give you an example of each, and then we are going to dive into how you can figure out when to use each of them in your writing. So I use narrative summary to convey the passage of time or give the readers information that I think is important for them to know, or just for them to understand the sequence of things and feel like the story is moving at a good pace, but is not immediately important enough to justify its own scene. So here are a couple of snippets of narrative summary from one of my books. I'm going to be reading examples from a book that I wrote in my paranormal thriller series. Phil and Max bring back so much food, and everyone eats on the floor of the bus. The smell of melting cheese and beans hangs in the air, which is better than gasoline. Usually, I love Taco Bell, but I can barely get down my chicken quesadilla. By the time we need to leave, it's sitting like a lump of clay in my stomach, or the last meal of someone who's facing the chair in the morning. So the characters have an entire dinner together, but nothing really happens, and so I breeze through it because I want the readers to get this feeling that they are gearing up to do something that's pretty scary. I want them to have the idea that they have eaten, because earlier in the scene before it, the characters go out to go get food, but it's not important enough to spend time showing exactly how many bites of food they took and everything that they said while they're having dinner. That's not something that changes the plot in any way. I just wanted the atmosphere of them all having dinner together before they embark on their next adventure. So after that, I launch right into another scene. Another example, nobody says anything on the drive to Cincinnati. We couldn't all fit in one car, so Jonah and I ride in Miles' squad car while Fiona drives Phil. Every minute that ticks down on the GPS makes my hand curl tighter around my axe. This narrative summary reflects the passage of time. The drive is not important enough to spend an entire scene on, because they're just sitting in the car in anticipation. But I want the readers to know that they went from point A to point B, and so I summarize it quickly and then get on with the scene. Most narrative summary is very simple. It is just straightforward sentences that are describing things that are happening, not extremely immersive, just conveying information, often with some humorous remarks, staying within the voice of the characters and the tone of the story. I believe everybody knows what a scene is, but I will give you some examples of the beginning of some scenes, also from the same book. Scenes have much more dynamic writing, and they take their time in each emotion that the character is feeling. They show the exact dialogue a character says, they dig into every single little moment to bring the readers into the important moments in time. So this is a snippet from a scene that I wrote. I reach forward to take his hand. He yanks it away, and something behind his eyes changes. Oh no. I didn't say it, he says. How many times do I have to tell you? But I search for words. You kissed me back. It was just a kiss. It means nothing. You said, I said nothing, he yells. What do I have to do to get that through your head? Stop yelling. Jonah scoffs like he's the one annoyed with me. A couple of seconds go by before he speaks. So if that scene were written in narrative summary, it would probably sound something like, Jonah and I had a fight. He said he never said that he loved me, that I was just making it up, and that I said that I really didn't believe him, and then he was yelling and I told him to stop. I mean, it wouldn't be that because that was awful, but it would describe the thing that was happening, whereas a scene like that shows you exactly what happens and doesn't describe the thing that's happening. Scenes are obviously more interesting than narrative summary. However, you need both to make a book work. If everything was a scene, your book would be so boring, and if everything was narrative summary, it would also be so boring. But how do you know when to use each? The general rule of thumb is that you want to write a scene when you want to impact the reader in some way, where you have a moment where a character changes or something in your plot changes that's important enough that you want the readers to linger in that moment. And you want to use narrative summary when you want to breeze through something as quickly as possible. So when there's a lot going on in your book, you want to use a scene, and when there's not that much going on, you want to use narrative summary. In other words, use scenes when you want to be impactful, and narrative summary when you want to breeze through something quickly. A masterclass I took used a quote when explaining this that I found very helpful. It's a Lee Child quote, and it says, "You should write the fast stuff slow and the slow stuff fast." This will become instinctual to you the more that you practice, But the way that I always think about this is that it's my job as the author to get readers in between each important plot point in my story as fast as possible, and for them to spend as much time in the important parts and not as much time in the less important parts. So I start by identifying all of the most important scenes in my book and figure out how to most effectively bridge those scenes. And then I can figure out how much time to spend on summary versus scene. So that's it for this video on narrative summary versus scene. I hope that it was helpful to you. If it was, I'd be super grateful if you could take a second and like it and subscribe to my channel. It helps me a lot with the algorithm and getting other people to discover my videos. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos sharing actionable and practical writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I am the author of the paranormal thriller They Stay series, which tells the story of a 16-year-old girl whose younger brother goes missing, and the only people who know what happened to him are the ghosts in the small town cemetery. So if you like books that remind you of Stranger Things and Goosebumps, go check those out. I also published my debut novel while I was 16, so I make videos on this channel sharing about my experiences as a teen author and how I was able to publish my book. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, go check out my books or check out my videos. And if you have any questions about scene or narrative summary, please feel free to drop them in the comments and I will do my very best to answer them. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody. And as always, happy writing.